Opposing Viewpoint's White Collar Crime, Book 2, How Does Money Laundering Occur and What Can Stop It? Viewpoint 4, Banks Should Not Be Responsible for Monitoring Money Laundering by Daniel J. Mitchell. Starting with a quote, "These absurd results are driven by government policies that force financial institutions to treat all customers as potential crooks." This viewpoint takes the position that the ways banks are forced to monitor anti-money laundering activity is too expensive and inhibits banks from lending to as many people as they would like. According to this viewpoint, the people this has the greatest potential to harm are those at the bottom of the economic system with incomes that are less easy to trace in the international financial system. From this perspective, anti-money laundering enforcement is just another form of inept government regulation blind to real-world conditions. Daniel Mitchell is a conservative economist who worked on former President George H.W. Bush's transition team in 1988. As you read, consider the following questions. What are some of the additional costs of anti-money laundering regulations according to this viewpoint? How can anti-money laundering efforts hurt poor people or the economies of developing nations? And third, what are some of the other approaches toward combating financial crimes that this viewpoint lays out instead of targeting money laundering? President Trump says he wants to roll back the burden of regulation, give the morass of red tape that is strangling the economy. This is a very worthy goal. It's also a daunting task. Fixing the sprawling regulatory state is the modern version of cleaning the Augean stables, and I'm not brimming with confidence that Trump and his appointees have Herculean powers. That being said, if they're deciding where to focus their deregulatory efforts, cost-benefit analysis would be a very useful guide. Simply stated, go after the red tape that imposes the highest costs while yielding the fewest benefits. And if that's the approach, so-called anti-money laundering regulations should be on the chopping block. Banks and other financial institutions are now being forced to squander billions of dollars in order to comply with laws, rules, and red tape that require them to spy on their customers. The ostensible purpose of AML policies is to discourage criminal behavior, but experts have concluded that this approach has been a failure. The reason why it costs billions of dollars is that not one mistake is allowed on certain requirements. To the extent that AML policies have had an impact, it's been negative. In addition to high cost and inefficiency, the laws and regulations have disproportionately harmed poor people. Richard Rahn, in the column for the Washington Times, says, AML laws are the modern version of prohibition, well-meaning in theory but counterproductive in practice. Money laundering fits under the definition of vague law because, unlike murder or robbery, it is a crime of an act but one of intent. It is not a crime of an act but one of intent. This leads to many problems and substantial prosecutorial abuse. It is not only banks and financial institutions that are supposed to know the source of the client's funds, but also such diverse people as car dealers, pawnbrokers, real estate agents, and on and on. Often, it is not considered good enough to know the source of a customer's funds, often a near impossibility, but the source of the funds of the customer's customer. The result is that banks and other financial institutions increasingly refuse to open accounts for low-income people. There is a very high fixed cost for banks and others to do business due diligence on their customers, the cost being roughly the same for a $5,000 deposit, a $500,000 deposit, or $5 million deposit. Given the massive penalties banks and other financial institutions are subject to for making even an unintentional mistake, their safest course of action is to drop small customers. Recent academic and think tank studies show the situation is only getting worse, all cost and no gain. The poor, including poor countries, and the honest pay of a huge price for all the additional compliance costs, which reduces productive global capital formation and real incomes. So all the civil money penalties that they put on banks only hurt the bank and the American economy and just fund more of the kind of prosecutorial work that continues this cycle. A working paper from the Center for Global Development digs into the numbers. The past 15 years have seen an unprecedented level of attention on anti-money laundering, issues by financial regulators, The total value of fines levied by regulators peaked at $15 billion in 2014 in the U.S. alone. Between 2010 and 2015, the Financial Action Task Force, an international group tasked with setting common AML standards across the globe, added over 50 different countries to an internationally recognized list of high-risk countries. There are growing concerns that this increase in regulatory activity is leading to a chilling effect on cross-border economic activity as banks limit their exposure to high-risk clients or jurisdictions. A process known as de-risking. This contraction of the correspondent banking network has sounded a number of alarm bells as these services are being seen as crucial for most cross-border services. The ICC survey reported that over 40% of respondents felt that AML and Know Your Customer requirements were a significant impediment to trade finance, with nearly 70% reporting they declined transactions that year. A large number of money transfer companies in the U.S., the UK, and Australia have lost access to banking services as a result of banks' desire to reduce their exposure to regulatory risk, potentially leading to a decrease in formal remittances to developing countries, a critical source of development finance. The combined effect of all of these pressures should be leading to declines in the aggressive flow of cross-border payments. And here are the results of the new empirical research in the study. The combination of large-scale fines, higher compliance costs, and international naming and shaming has anecdotally made many banks to withdraw from certain lines of business or geographic areas to the potential detriment of cross-border economic activity. We find evidence that gray listing by the FATF is